Welcome to SmithWeekly Discussions, an occasional program for our readers and listeners of SmithWeekly Research. Please note this program is a private discussion and everything contained herein is for entertainment and educational purposes only. With that, we hope you're in a comfortable position, along with your favorite beverage, to enjoy the discussion. Before we get into our talk today, we want to say thanks for questions coming from our audience at SmithWeekly, including Rob E., the Yellow Cake Advocate, at Economy Notes, Eric K., at Ooges, Benjamin H., and at IMMPrem. George Glasier is with us today. George is Director, President, and CEO of Western Uranium and Vanadium, a U.S.-focused uranium explorer and developer advancing the Sunday Mine project. The company is listed on a Canadian Securities Exchange under the symbol WUC and also on the U.S. OTC markets under the symbol WSTRF. George, thank you for coming back to the show.
My pleasure.
So George, let's get right to it. So Section 232, when do you see that report and decision being released?
Well, what Trump's done in the past, of course, he has not taken a great deal of time after he gets the recommendation from the Department of Commerce. So I think we'll see within the next 30 days a decision coming out of the White House.
Excellent. And if 232 is successful, how long do you think it'll really take, if everything is successful and full with the petition, how long do you think it'll take U.S. producers to meet that 25% quota?
Well, if it comes down to that, I think it would take 3 or 4 years to get to 25% of U.S. demand. If you take a look at current production capacity, developed, permitted properties and projects, you look at those, what's the production capacity there currently versus ones that could come on with additional capital permitting and, obviously, time to develop them. I think it's, 4 years probably to get up to that. Maybe a little sooner, but I doubt it. And most of the production in the U.S. has to come from conventional production. And we only have one fully permitted operational uranium mill in the United States. And of course, that's owned by Energy Fuels. Now, are they going to allow non-owned properties in there? If they don't, the production capacity is very limited in the U.S. In the next 4 years until we could build a new mill. And that takes time, as you know.
Right. Yeah, I think there's some interesting points there. And, the time frame 4 years is probably likely. But I think also another piece of that is how much capital really gets thrown at the sector and the infrastructure. And that's a big question that really nobody can answer at this point. And so I think timing, I think you're probably pretty close on your thoughts on the 4-year figure. So on the 232, a little bit more, if there is a dual price, do you think international and a U.S. price, do you think utilities will be able to get better prices and deals to fill up their remaining 75% requirements outside of the U.S.? Or do you see price really normalizing around the incentive pricing in both markets, irrespective?
No, I think what you're saying is they're going to be two-tier pricing for a while. I think there definitely will. If a chunk of the U.S. market is reserved for U.S. producers, that's going to cut somebody out, obviously. So to market that material, into the U.S. utilities, on the remaining, say, 75%, I think there's going to be a competition. Now whether Cameco's involved, I doubt if Cameco's going to lower their expected price. But the Kazakhs, if they want to market, and the Russians into here, probably going to have to lower their price. I don't think the world price is going to come up to whatever the U.S. price is for a while until world consumption, goes up. I mean, it could over 4, 5, 6 years, but not immediately.
Okay, well, I want to move on to something else. Is there any interest at Western to look at and consider projects outside of the U.S. during this new uranium cycle, or is the focus kind of going to hang around in kind of the Utah and Colorado, New Mexico, Texas area?
Well, in the short term, we'll stay in the U.S., and I'm not saying that there's no possibilities to go outside. We like Canada. We like what's going on up there. Certain areas we also like. But in the short term, our goal is to get into production, acquire more properties in the U.S. For uranium and vanadium, and, get into a cash flow position before we start to acquire properties. I'm not saying we wouldn't if the right transaction came along. And we've looked at a number of things outside the U.S. We haven't acquired anything, but it's not beyond possibility, but it's probably not going to happen in the next year simply because we've got distressed production in the U.S.
So Western just completed a 3.8 million Canadian private placement. Did you participate in the placement, and how will these funds be used to create shareholder value?
Yeah, I was going to participate, but we were oversubscribed, obviously, and we're still, oversubscribed. And so I did not participate. I was willing to participate, certainly, but because we had such demand, and I've already got a large chunk of the Western stock, of course, as you know. The funds are going to be used, basically, what we have announced is we're going to open up the Sunday mine. We've already started to locate the people and the equipment. We expect to have within the next 2 weeks that project underway. It starts slow, but those funds are to go in and assess, the very high grade vanadium that we believe is in the project that was never, mined, and then send samples of that out to a number of customers around the world. So that's what we announced some time ago, and now we have the funds. That's exactly what we're going to do. And of course, that also gets the mine ready for production under the 232 for uranium. So again, it'll be two things, but we already know the uranium is in there. It's been, part of it's defined, not all of it. There's only a small drill out that Denison did primarily for uranium, and that 43101 or 43101 was done on that. But we will be able to expand, the resource certainly by what we're doing in the mine, underground drilling, maybe some surface drilling, but primarily underground drilling.
Well, I want to talk about Sunday here in just a moment, but I want to go back to this placement, and you mentioned the shareholder quantity that you have as an owner. Along those lines of capital structure, you own a fair chunk of shares, which really reinforces your stake that you have in Western. Where does your ownership stand today in terms of percentage, and how much of those shares did you purchase, and how much were granted?
All the shares that I have were purchased. Well, I purchased the assets from Energy Fuels and put them into the public company. So mine are all purchased. They weren't granted. I do have some options, but none of the options have been exercised. My options today are at higher price. And so all my shares have been basically purchased by vending in my assets in the private company into the public company.
Okay. And George, can you give us how much you have percentage-wise right now, roughly, with this new placement, and how many shares are actually outstanding after this placement?
Well, we had, the exact numbers I'll have to pull up, but I probably have about 17% ownership. I have about 5 million shares.
Okay. So let's go back to Sunday, vanadium, the sampling work. So for our audience who maybe is not clear or needs to catch up, can you walk us through that process that starts here in a couple of weeks? Give us kind of the start to finish and just walk us through, and then give us the time frame from sample taking and completion of the work and samples off to clients.
Well, obviously, the first thing is open the mine. We'll ventilate it. The ventilation fans, we turn on electricity, we ventilate it, do a few minor repairs, and then we bring in, we've got a very experienced geologist coming on board. Actually, I hired him with Energy Fuels when I founded Energy Fuels. He's probably the most experienced uranium, vanadium geologist in the U.S. And so he's coming on board, and will design the exploration or the program to define the high-grade vanadium that we believe was just bypassed when they mined it for primarily uranium in the past. And so he'll lay out a detailed program on how we assess the high-grade vanadium that we believe is in the mines. We'll open 2 mines to start with. There are 5 mines in the Sunday complex. So the first project will be to open 2 of them and go and do exactly that with that definition program. It's not exactly exploration because we know it was left there by everybody that worked in there. Says we just bypassed it. So we'll go in and define that. We'll write a technical report on it. Then we'll move into the additional mines. So the timing on that, it probably depends on first samples. And when we're taking this, it'd be easy to take samples. We can take samples within the first month. Now, one of the things they're going to do, the customers say, this is great stuff. How much do you have? How much can we count on? Can we get 5 or 6 million pounds over a number of years? So that's where you've got to define the quantity. But we will be sending out a number of samples of the high-grade vanadium around the world so that they can test it for processing in their own facilities. That process, the first samples will probably go out within 30 days after we've got the miners in there, because we will do some bulk mining, not large quantities, but enough to take out a relative sample to ship to the various customers.
Okay.
And then again, it takes how long for them to assess and come back with us. But in the meantime, we will be doing the next stage, which is defining how much of the resource we have.
So how about uranium production at the Sunday mine? I don't think we have much for historical record on vanadium production, but back to uranium production at Sunday. Give us your thoughts on past production when Denison was operating there, and what do you see as really viable for production there when you bring operations online? How do we get to those million plus pounds per year at Sunday, just kind of judging off what happened last time when Denison was there?
Well, Denison, when they were last operating, had two contractors in there. One of them was operating two mines, and the other one was only into one of the mines. So three of the five mines were in operation when Denison was last producing from the mine. If you open all five mines at the same level Denison was producing, the three mines, there where you usually get to 1 million pounds a year, because each mine easily could produce, 200 to 250,000 pounds of uranium a year at the mining rates that Denison was operating at. And so the facility is capable of it as it was producing back in 2009. But again, it's opening all five mines, and it's, they were using contractors. They brought in the equipment. We will, when we start mining, start with contractors, because that way we minimize the capital. We don't have a great deal of mining equipment. We'll buy some minor equipment, when we start this assessment program. But then when you go into full-scale mining, that's where you need the production equipment. And, that's costly equipment, and contractors charge a bit, obviously, more than we could do it if we directly operated. But again, I think for capital cost, we bring in contractors to operate those mines, and the contractors are available, ready to go to work, and they're experienced. There's the one that both of the two that did it for Denison are available today.
And what do you see on the vanadium side? Can you share with us any information on the vanadium side, assuming that there's a client to buy material and you guys go in and get set up and start working the vanadium side of that? What do you see there?
Well, yeah, obviously, if you go in and produce the vanadium, as a separate commodity rather than the uranium, and mine at about the same rates. Now, the vanadium grades in the Sunday mine are 5 to 6 the uranium grades. And so if we're going to see that same kind of grade in kind of the non-uranium vanadium seams, easily the thing could produce 5 or 6 million pounds of vanadium a year, assuming all 6 or 5 mines are operating. So that, again, that's what we're going to have to do some testing and see what kind of mining rates we could get. But, just the same type of mining would be done as it was done in the past for the uranium vanadium ore. So again, we're looking at probably in that range of production for vanadium.
Okay, and you guys will be going in there. So for the audience who doesn't quite understand the process there, give us kind of the outline of what you're going to be doing. You're just going to be kind of stockpiling the uranium ore, or what are you going to be doing there?
Well, if the vanadium ore that was bypassed had virtually no uranium. It might have very low-grade uranium, and that's why they didn't take it. All right. When Union Carbide was mining, they were mining primarily for uranium. Now, they did have a vanadium recovery, but if the vanadium grade was high and the uranium grade was very low, or there was no uranium, they just left it. That's the primary source of the new vanadium we'll be going after. So whether it has a very low content of uranium or no uranium, that's the ore we would be primarily shipping. Now, we can ship uranium, vanadium ore combination. There's been some comment that you can't ship vanadium ore or uranium ore. You can ship uranium ore anywhere you want in the world. You do have to get export license, but it's not a restricted commodity. If you can ship yellow cake, which is the refined uranium, which is shipped all over the world, you can certainly ship ore. But, our first primarily, we're going to look at that vanadium standalone, because I'm talking to vanadium customers. Now, if you've got the uranium in the vanadium ore, there's a number of these vanadium customers that also could process the uranium.
Okay.
Again, not all of them, but some of them already have the capacity to process the vanadium as well as the uranium.
So the thought process at this point really is let someone else handle the milling of the material, and you guys at this point the operation would just really consist of excavating the vanadium ore and then shipping that off. So
Mm-hmm.
on site, the use of ablation at this point would probably not be occurring out of the gate. Let's move to that for a moment. Tell us about that for just a moment, and what your thought is on how you guys are going to process.
Well, we would ablate the vanadium ore. Yeah, we would upgrade it. It works on uranium and vanadium, so why wouldn't we? We would operate the ablation and upgrade the ore before we ship it, because then you got a much higher value product you're shipping. You ship it a long ways. You know, if you come out of a 2% vanadium ore as you mine it, you got so many pounds of vanadium per ton, 2% of the 2,000, versus if you are able to remove a lot of the waste and basically have a higher grade material you're shipping, it's worth a lot more. So the transportation issue, is not nearly as critical when you have high value product coming, a higher value product.
Yeah, and that makes sense because I think there was a little bit of confusion with some of the folks out there that maybe the ablation wasn't going to be used and it was just going to be just shipping the ore entirely. So you guys are looking at using the ablation to upgrade and get that higher grade ore out, reducing your shipments and doing all that on site before you ship it. So what else on the ablation? So what else is needed from an agency standpoint to be able to use the technology for vanadium? And then also tell us what is required when the time comes for uranium. What is required there to be able to use the ablation at the site?
Well, for vanadium, we'll need a technical amendment to our mine permit. We're working on a technical amendment to the permit to cover the stockpile outside. I don't know if you're aware of that. That's public information. In fact, within the next few days, we'll submit the final technical amendment, which goes through the state. And that's in a process that we would do the same thing if we change what we do underground. Now, if we operate underground, we'll just have to have a technical amendment. We won't change the surface operation at the Sunday mine at all. Now, if you were going to operate ablation on the surface, then you would have to go through a change of your plant operation. But our initial plan is to operate underground and not change the surface operation at all of the Sunday mine.
Okay, and then on the uranium side?
Well, the uranium side, if we're primarily doing it for vanadium, we fall under the exception. As I talk to people, if you're primarily mining for something other than uranium, then you don't fall under mill licenses. Clearly, you may have to get a source material license, but that's fairly easy to get according to our attorneys. So we may, if we were doing a combination, may have to get a source material license. But we'll cross that when we decide, to mine and ablate uranium. We're not there yet, so. Right now, we'll see what happens. Uranium prices are not high enough to justify mining uranium, but vanadium prices, even though they've fallen, you can justify mining that high-grade vanadium, even at today's price. It's come off considerably. Now, if vanadium drops down to $5 a pound again, then it's probably not economical.
Okay, so give us a time frame just briefly on the kind of setting that up. So the idea, the scenario is that you're underground, you're going after just vanadium only. You've got the ablation equipment set up underground. Give us kind of a time frame from when that might start to occur.
Well, I would say from the time we open the mine, let's say we open the mine mid-May, we got about 6 months of assessment, sending samples out. And if it comes back and we're able to get a contract that basically sets a floor price, that we can rely on, the economics work, then we can move into the mining stage, take a bit of time, probably 30 to 60 days to get a technical amendment ready to go, another 30 to 60 days to get approved. So, you're looking probably by the end of this year, we could be actually in production. That's assuming that a couple things, the vanadium market stays high enough, and we're not going to rely on the spot market. What if we decided to sell it at $12 around today's price? And by the time we produce it and ship it out and put in the money to start mining, what if the price dropped to $5? So we do need a base price or at least a floor price contract for the vanadium. And that's no secret. It would be the same thing with uranium. Nobody's going to start, even if the price of uranium goes up to 60 or 70 bucks, if they cannot get a contract, they're not going to put a lot of money into betting on the spot price. So those are there's the market considerations, and of course the timing depends on these customers and how they feel about setting a base price. We'll have to watch the vanadium market. We've seen it fall from the highs of around 30 down to one just a little above $12. So I'm watching the vanadium price carefully. We're still going to assess the high grade vanadium, but whether we start mining it's an asset of the company, and it should be defined. It'll create value, we believe, for the shareholders by defining it, even because vanadium goes up and down, obviously. If it goes back down, into the $7 or $8, it's bound to go back up. I don't think the world can produce what it needs at those prices. Assessing the vanadium is going to add value to the company. Producing it will add value, but we'll only produce when we can have positive cash flows.
So let's assume we get a contract at a favorable price, or maybe at a discount a little bit to where the current price is. Mm-hmm. And from there, you guys have some of the base ablation equipment. How much to get going?
The one ablation machine we have is a commercial machine, but if you're into 2 of the mines, you need to have an ablation machine in each mine, in the mine. So you can see if we open all 5, we need 4 more machines. And it's pretty simple. So at your mining rate, 1 machine would handle 1 mine, but you're going to have an ablation machine for each one of those mines. So as we move into production, we could move into production with only 1. But then to get up to the production rates you and I were talking about, it's going to take obviously more machines, which we can build, at a capital cost estimated by one of the fabricators that helped us with this one. We can probably build the machines for $400,000 or $500,000 each. They're not terribly expensive. They're pumps and pipes and things like that.
So if you're gonna start just kind of a starter operation with the 1 machine, just give us a ballpark. Give the audience kind of a figure of where you guys think you would need for capital to kind of just get off the ground with a 1 mine operation, just kind of starting up.
Well, if we were going to start the 1 mine, the money we raise now will open it up. We've got an estimate that we can do everything, buy a little bit of equipment, not going into production, of course, but with our existing machine, for the capital we already raised. So we wouldn't have to raise any more capital. Now, to go into production, if we do it with a contractor, he brings his mining equipment. And so, the capital cost to go into production with 1 mine is going to be covered under our opening, with what we just raised. There's virtually no more capital if you use a contractor. But to open 1 mine, that's just a fifth of the production. You would need to probably open more mines to satisfy a vanadium customer. If 1 mine can produce 1 million pounds, 1 million pounds is not probably enough for a customer to be interested in. And most of these customers want more quantity. Vanadium customers, they need it. They've got processing plants. And so the question is, maybe you start with 1 mine and start shipping the $1 million or 1 million pounds a year rate, but they want more from what we understand. So then you move into more capital cost as you open more mines, but the capital cost is primarily, if you use contractors, is primarily just build the additional ablation units.
It looks like, aside from the sampling work there to kind of prove up the material, the vanadium, sounds like it really boils down to really just pinning down a buyer at the right price. Is there any other information on that at this point? Are you still talking to some folks, or can you give some information on that?
Oh yeah, we're talking to a number of people. Made contacts when we were up at the mining conference in Toronto. Several contacts, new contacts beyond what I'd already talked to at the Alloy conference. It was months ago. And so again, we were delayed a bit, I think, by the markets. The capital markets. The stock market late last year was not too attractive. We waited a bit to raise this money. We couldn't do anything until we raised this money, but the interest is still there in a number of these people because there's still shortages of vanadium. Obviously the price has fallen, so it's more imbalanced, but we're still talking to them and they're still anxious to get samples.
Let's move on. And one of the other points too is I know that Energy Fuels, of course, has produced out some vanadium there, and they have some production that's hanging around. but yet we haven't seen anything as far as a deal to sell it yet. And so I'm sure I think the market with uranium or with Energy Fuels is the shareholders are kind of waiting for that news to start come about, given their status where they're at with that. And yet there hasn't been any announcements on the sales side yet. So it'll be interesting to see who kind of gets to that point and who can make the deals. And on that, I want to also talk about another issue just briefly. Is there any update on the toll milling agreements? And what is the company thinking at this point on that subject? Is it kind of a moot point and you guys are going to kind of move a different direction?
Well, obviously, Energy Fuels can sell in the spot market if they produced a couple 100,000 pounds a month, for a year or two. They're only producing vanadium out of the waste, the mine water or the mill water. They're not going into primary production of vanadium, so they've got a somewhat limited quantity to sell. So they probably don't need a long-term contract. They don't have the commitment to start a mine on the vanadium. Recovering it out of the tailings water is what they're doing or plan to do. And they've said they can do maybe 200,000 pounds a year, depending on the market. I don't know what their cost is. They haven't told anybody what the cost of doing that is, but I assume it's fairly attractive, so they can probably just sell that into the spot market. They don't need a long-term contract, I would guess. Now, again, that's, that what they're doing there is a little bit different than primary ore recovery. So, I don't have any idea what the cost is because it has not been done at the mill before. This will be the first time. And I understand they've done it successfully. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's probably a good thing. So again, I think, they'll find a market for what they produce and probably just sell into the spot market. And if the spot market goes down, I think they can start and stop that process very quickly. So they don't have a lot of commitment, to that. And it's a good thing for them. As far as toll milling, we haven't talked to them about toll milling lately. They've come out with announcements and said they're only going to mill their own ore. If that remains their position, I mean, they don't own the Sunday, so I guess it cuts the Sunday out. It cuts all the numbers of others out too. So again, it's going to hamper the ability to produce uranium in the United States if they cut the mill off. And again, I don't know if the 232 petition will require them to open it up to others, and it seems like it's almost antitrust. If you give one company a big chunk of the market, it's a monopoly. I would think that's antitrust under some of our laws. I'm not an antitrust expert, but you don't think the utilities are going to jump on this and say, hold on, you've required us to buy a certain amount, and there's only one uranium mill in the United States. One company owns it, and if they don't open it up on reasonable commercial grounds, I'm not saying give it away, man, they can make money, and they're far better off taking in toll ore and filling that mill. That mill will not be filled with their ore. And if you took a look at their last presentation that I saw that they handed out in Toronto, they admit what their production capacity is in the near term. They can't fill that mill. They just don't have enough capacity. And so it's better, I was with the company that built that mill, and we had toll milling contracts with a number of people because, it's better to have a full mill and make, a little less on a tolling contract than you do on your own ore, but you still make money. That makes money for the shareholders. And I believe they'll come around to that point where they will mill for others once they start the mill. Now they can say anything, the mill's not operating. So, they can say, no, we're not going to open it to anybody else because they're not operating. But once they start operating, they need to achieve the best economics, and the best economics are to run that mill constantly. It runs, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week once it's running. And it's better to toll for people. And there are other miners out there with small mines that you wouldn't toll, you would just buy their ore. This is the way, of course, Denison operated it that way in the past, and so did the first Energy Fuels that built that mill. And that's the economic way to operate that mill, is to maximize production, whether it's your ore or whether it's somebody else's.
Yeah, I think you made up a couple points that are key there. First of all, it'll be interesting to see if they sell the vanadium. They haven't yet, whether it's contracted or spot. We still haven't seen anything on that, at least last I checked. And then on the other point, you made a mention of antitrust. When you had the market downturn last time, after, well, it was really building before Fukushima, but Fukushima really stuck the old knife in the heart. But a number of mills and so forth at that time were in a different status. The Uranium One operations and some of the ISR projects around the states. What's your thought on the fact that a number of these companies chose to let their assets fall into the status that they are in today, namely a number of mills, conventional, and then also you have some of the ISR projects that really need some of the work to get going again. And there's not much there either, but there is a little bit, UEC's Hobson and of course UR Energy's project. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think that that Energy Fuels purposely put the market in this situation, or did really everybody else kind of put themselves in the situation? What's your thought on that?
Well, for conventional mills, bear in mind, the conventional mills in the United States were shut down and reclaimed a long time ago, way before Fukushima. All right. There hasn't been a new uranium mill built or operational in the United States for 30 years. So from conventional standpoint, they didn't do anything to cause this. I mean, they just happened to have the only operational uranium mill. Of course, the other two is one that, the Uranium One mill at Kickapoo. It's not operational, and it does not have an operating permit. I'm not saying it couldn't go into operation with capital and with time. And then, of course, the other is a Rio Tinto mill in Wyoming. Again, it could go into operation. Those are the two other mills that are potentially in production within a number of years, but they're not ready to go now. They're not like White Mesa. So, after Fukushima, people didn't shut down conventional mills. There weren't any left. The milling situation hasn't changed. Most of these mills were shut down after the price dropped it started dropping in 79 after 3 Mile Island, if you'll recall. And there were probably 25 mills operating in the United States. We were the largest uranium producer in the world, producing over 40 million pounds a year. Look at the number of major companies that were producing in New Mexico and Wyoming, Colorado, Utah. There was a lot of production, but basically the price stayed down so long that finally these companies said, hey, we're just going to tear them down and reclaim them. The big oil companies did it. The big mining companies did it, and the mills are gone. They're not there anymore. There are no mills in New Mexico. New Mexico used to be a major producer of uranium, a number of mills. They're not. So the milling situation has got to change over a period of time if we're going to be a major producer again. We've got to build more mills, maybe not 25 mills, but you can't do it in one. Now, maybe we bring on the Sweetwater mill. Maybe that comes on. That's in Wyoming, and maybe the Kickapoo mill comes on, and maybe another new one comes on somewhere. But, you can produce enough uranium. White Mesa claims they've got the capacity of, I don't know what they say, 6 or 7 million pounds of mill capacity, and that's probably true, but they don't have the mine capacity now to do that. Now, eventually, with their resource base, given time and money, they could probably fill the mill up with their own ore. But time and money doesn't mean it can be done now.
Sure.
So what you're looking at, and the ISR, sure, UEC can come on, UR Energy, there's production that can come on. But, if you take a look at the total capacity of that is really there in the short term, it's probably a couple million pounds a year.
Right.
Go look at what it produced in the past. That's a good indication of what it can produce in the near future.
Sure. And I just was, I'm skeptical that it can get the nameplate quickly. And obviously you mentioned that there's a production, a supply issue getting to the mill as well. And so it's all speculative as far as where they can reach on their production rates, and if they can get to capacity quickly, or if they have issues there that are unknown, that are unforeseen at this point. But I think what I was getting at too, George, was the fact that I don't see that it was purposeful. That and because you were part of it, and Steve Antony was there as well. I don't know that keeping the license there and keeping that project in good shape, or the mill in good shape, I don't know that it was purposeful to corner the market in a way that was in an antitrust type fashion.
Of course not.
That's what I'm looking at, because the price of the market caused things to fall apart in the States. It wasn't anything that one group tried to do over a 10-year period. And so I hear that a little bit, and I just kind of think that, look, there is Apple out there, there is a Microsoft, there is a McDonald's, there is a Burger King, there's a Coke and a Pepsi, and there's ISR and there's conventional. And for me, I just see it as, there is still choice. It's not like everybody's forcing Microsoft Windows down your throat, at least not yet.
Well, and that's exactly true. But if they put a quota on a certain amount, it's got to be produced somewhere. And if it's a very near-term quota, look at the production capacity of ISR. It cannot fill, much more than what it's done in, the past 10 years. Look at the production of those things,
Right.
and see what they can do. And it's not like the utilities say, oh, okay, we can go to ISR. But you can't step up ISR overnight either. There's permits, there's development. Even without going to conventional, there is only a limited number of ISR things that work in the U.S. Not everything works for ISR. I mean, it's got to be right geologic. There's a number of things about it. Take a look at Peninsula. Peninsula is a good project up there that didn't work with their plan. Remember? I mean, that's why they're trying to change it to basically an acid leach. That's a good project, but it didn't work because of the geology. I'm not an ISR expert, but I just, what I read, what I hear from people, it just wouldn't work, in the way they do typically those in the U.S. So now if they can change to, an acid leach, basically, it'll work better. Now, whether it works up to the standard they thought it would, I don't know. But again, not everything works on ISR. And so how many deposits do we have in the U.S. that are ISR, capable? And in my guess, and again, this is not, I would say 70% of the U.S. reserves or resources or in the ground uranium cannot be mined with ISR. It has to be conventional, just because of the geology.
Right.
So I'd say if we've got a nice resource base in the United States. When I say resource, I just use that not under the SEC standards, but just uranium that's pretty well known in the ground. We don't know the cost of it. But the U.S. contains a lot of uranium, but most of it has to be conventionally recovered.
Sure.
And to be dependent on, there are ISR deposits, and they'll discover more. But it's just the nature of the uranium for ISR recovery. It has to be in a certain setting, and you probably know that. And most of the people that follow these know a little bit about the technical aspects of ISR. So I'm not telling them new things. I'm just repeating what I know about it.
And so, I just think that you're going to need capital and some expertise to really get up to that real production levels that could be needed under a full maximum positive outcome of a 232 petition. And so I think that you're just going to need a bunch of capital injection to really get things going, and obviously a few brains to get some of the stuff done on the ground and expertise to get it there and get it to the market. So I want to ask you, I want to move to another subject. I just want to come back for a moment to Pinyon Ridge. I think there's a little bit of audience out there that's still a little bit confused on Pinyon Ridge. Can you just briefly give us the status there and clarify for the audience the ownership of that project?
Well, the ownership of Pinyon Ridge, the mill itself, is in a company that's owned by 4 individuals. Okay, 4 individuals own 100% of Pinyon Ridge. And I'm not one of them, okay? And I gave up my interest. I was a 50% owner of it, but because of the conflict potentially, with Western and Pinyon Ridge, I'm no longer the owner of that 50%. So 4 individuals own the asset, and the license has been revoked. The state of Colorado revoked the license, a year ago, maybe a little over that. And so there is no license for a mill there anymore. Now, do you want to continue? Do these individuals or anybody else want to continue to try to license or do that license again? I don't know. It was revoked, in my opinion, on minor grounds. In my opinion, it shouldn't have been revoked. We should have had another hearing to correct any minor deficiencies in the license. And when the state decided not to give Pinyon Ridge Mill applicants a chance to have one more hearing, as the court said, absent another hearing, the license should be revoked. And they relied on it. He didn't say it had to have a hearing, so they said, we're revoking the license. And they said, basically, start over. And at that point, you have to decide whether it's worth starting over. I don't know whether it'll ever be done. Tell you the truth, if I were to do it again, I wouldn't do it in Colorado. I've made that statement to a number of people. Why don't we go to a state that's more, accepts it, wants the economic development? Uranium mills are no more environmentally unfriendly than a lot of other mining projects, but people don't understand it. And of course, why do it? So if I were to build another uranium mill, I wouldn't go to Colorado, my opinion.
Okay.
So again, the Pinyon Ridge Mill is not I have nothing to do with it. But again, whether anybody else does something with it, it's up to them.
Right now, it's kind of an expensive wildlife reserve, or maybe maybe a rental hunting ground, or perhaps maybe a kind of a firing range or something like that.
all of the above.
Okay, so let's move on. So why should investors be taking a stake in Western Uranium today, after the capital raise, where you guys are today, and the status that you guys are about to embark on the sampling and work there at Sunday? What would you say to potential investors?
Well, I think the value of this company is both uranium and vanadium. In the near term, it's probably vanadium, because if we're able to define a significant resource of vanadium that we can start shipping it in the near term, we're not dependent on what happens with uranium. Whether there's 232 relief or not, uranium prices are probably going to recover in the next 4 or 5 years if you look at everybody that looks at the details. Maybe it doesn't get up to $70, but it gets up to the point where we will have some U.S. production, I believe, in a world market. But what you need to look at is we're two commodities. We've got the uranium and the vanadium, and the vanadium could very well support the company until the world price of uranium, recovers. Now, maybe 232 gives the U.S. production some relief in the near term. That's a plus, definitely a plus for anybody that has U.S. uranium, including us. So again, if you're counting on 232, if you've only got uranium, if that doesn't go through, then these companies are going to have to wait a number of years. And I guess that's what the petition says. We can't last that long, okay, whether it's 4 or 5 or 6 years. They're basically saying you got to give us relief now because we can't last. And that's what Energy Fuels has said. Now, UR Energy, same thing. So, look at our company, and with the potential for the vanadium, we think that is our survival until uranium comes back. If you don't get 232 relief, if you get 232 relief, then uranium is the commodity that could very well drive this company as well as other companies. So, again, I tell shareholders, it's a value. We've got good resources. We've got permitted mines. We're probably, every company says they're undervalued. So you look at it and see what our current market cap is versus what it could be. And investors invest for one reason, and that's to make money. I've learned that over the years. They're not interested in anything else except making money. If there's a way that they see the value of these shares go up, that's how they make money. And of course, if you're already fully valued, then maybe you don't make much. So you take a look at the value of the companies, and all of these companies, what their asset base is, what their near-term capacity is, and potentially whether they would be an acquisition target in the fairly near term. And obviously, that's one way you can cash out and create shareholder value. And I'm not opposed to selling this company for the right price and to the right company. And that's certainly something that I would look at as a major shareholder. I would not hold it up. Some people say, well, I own 20%. I don't want to sell this company, and I can stop a sale. That's not me. If this company can be sold for the right price, I'll be the first one to support that. And I think a lot of shareholders have asked me that, and I'm not one that's going to say, no, I'm in this for the next 10 years just because I want to be a uranium producer. So that's what I tell people, and I think, you make your own decision on whether the value of these shares go up. All mining is risky. Commodities are risky. And that's why the investors in this, in mining and in commodities, they make money sometimes and they lose money. But overall, hopefully they make money. And they take multiple bets. They don't just put all their money into one company or one commodity. Wise commodity investors have a basket of commodities and a basket of companies. And I think we're one of those that could be potentially, in their basket.
Very well. So, George, where is Western going to be over the next, say, 6 months as far as conferences, et cetera? What's the status on that side? And then how can investors reach out to the company for more information?
Well, the next one scheduled is a small conference. It's held.
That's John Tommaso's very independent research conference in New Jersey.
Towards the end of June, we're going to have our annual general meeting in New York City. I think it's the 22nd of June. Don't have anything scheduled in May because I will be tied up with the opening of the mine. I did not want to be traveling because I will be personally supervising all of the activities to open this mine. So I've left my schedule open during May, start again in June, with the conference in New Jersey and then our AGM, and then, whatever. Summertime is just a little slower. We'll go at it strong starting in September, certainly.
And we're looking forward to seeing some photos and some information coming out of on the ground operations there. One other question, George, if there's anything else you'd like to add before we go, but I wanted to ask you what your favorite evening cocktail is.
Well, it depends on the evening of the week. I drink beer, I drink martinis, drink wine, a number of things. In the winter, I drink Jack Daniels. In the summer, I drink gin. No, I appreciate the chance to talk to you and your company and the people that follow you. You do a great job. Thank you.
Okay. Well, George, I appreciate it. And thanks for taking the time today to come on.
Good. Thank you.